Hello and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. Well, does politics always trump economics? Going by the Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath's waiver of farm loans, it would certainly seem so. To be sure, it was a key poll promise, but in terms of the long-term interests of the UPIs themselves, wouldn't it have been better to quietly shelve that proposal? It certainly wouldn't have been the first time that poll promises have been dropped, rather than to waive loans and do irreparable damages to the finances of UP, of banks and possibly even that of the country itself. Unfortunately, populism always wins, short term. But there are huge long-term economic costs, as the RBI governor warned of in his post-monetary policy press conference. And these are not unknown to the political class either, particularly to someone like the Yogi, who as a maths graduate should know his numbers. He certainly does know them. As pressure mounts on other state governments to follow the Yogi's example and the judiciary weighs in with its own misguided activism, the Tamil Nadu High Court has just directed the state government to extend the waiver to all farmers. We're going to discuss the menace, and I must call it menace, of farm waivers with two experts, Pradeep Kumar, former Managing Director, State Bank of India, who will look at the issue through the lens of a banker, and Govinda Rao, former Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi, who will don his usual fiscal lens. Welcome to the show, Pradeep, Govind.
Thank you.
Govind, as someone who's been tracking the macroeconomy for years, let me start by asking you, will loan waivers really succeed in addressing the underlying distress in the agricultural sector, or will they be only a temporary balm, like Band-Aid on a deep wound? Govind?
Certainly, it doesn't address the basic fundamental disequilibrium in the system. In fact, the issue of, in quite a large proportion of farmers don't even get formal loans from the formal sector. They continue to suffer. Those who get loan from the farmer sector are not necessarily the ones who suffer the most. And more than anything else, the issue of so farmers' distress has to be addressed through proper insurance, proper availability of irrigation, and in fact, you see, if you start doing loan waiver, you are completely breaking the discipline in the system. And there is a huge moral hazard, and everybody will borrow the money with the hope that there will be some waiver of loan later, and this continues, and this is a contagion effect. Now, Uttar Pradesh has started it. Now this will spread to Maharashtra. There will be Punjab. Because everybody has all, so there is a lot of pressure. There will be Karnataka show on that. And the bigger major political parties are vying with one another, saying that why farm loan is not waived, and how much more can you take it? If you remember in 2008, the then UPA government waived the farm loans, and the damage to the economy was almost 76,000 crores. And who bears the burden? At a time when the banking system itself is in a distress, at a time when the banking system is in very bad shape, you put additional burden on that. Who is ultimately going to pay for it? The taxpayer? What are you trying to do in the process?
Govind, you spoke like a true economist. Pradeep, now as a banker, let me ask you, a lot of bleeding hearts, misguided hearts, whichever way you want to put it, point out that banks are quite happy to indulge large corporate borrowers who owe crores of rupees to banks. But the moment there's any talk at all of showing a little bit of sympathy to small farmers, elitist bankers like you, former bankers like me, and now the RBI governor speak of credit discipline getting vitiated. Is there some truth in that? Are we adopting double standards? Or is it important to distinguish between a blanket waiver and bad loans where the bankers do pursue the borrowers but are often unable to recover the dues for a number of reasons? Pradeep?
See, in regard to corporate borrowers, there is a feeling the banks are waiving the loans. Banks are not waiving, banks are putting their best foot forward to recover the loans. There is no waiver of such is given to corporate loans. Yes, loans become bad for various reasons and the banks put their best foot forward to recover. Unfortunately, our legal system is too slow and tortuous, and chances of recovery in a tortuous process becomes bleak. I do agree. I think farmers have to be given some sympathy. They are small, most of them are small and marginal. Their ability to withstand shocks is very low. But I don't think this is the method. See, the farmers have, what risk the farmers face? The production risk and the price risk. So you will have to mitigate the risk through other means, production risk through crop insurance, investment in irrigation, investment in farm extension services, I think, which for the last 2 decades has almost died. And price risk maybe through the MSP, better procurement, or I would even say that between the actual price and a prefixed price, the difference the government can pay to the farmer. So these are the ways to remove the risks, manage the risks in the system. I don't think waiver is a way. This disincentivizes the farmer who has already paid, the farmer who has not taken a credit from the formal banking system. And what is happening is it's a disincentive even to bankers to lend further. I have seen when I was 4 or 5 years back in State Bank of Travancore and we were handling agriculture, our field staff were unwilling. They said there's a waiver. When I go and ask, people are saying, why are you coming and asking me? There's one waiver will be followed by another. Please don't come to our doorstep for recovery. And what happens is the further loaning to the sector becomes slower, and banks do ingenious methods of achieving the 18% through gold loans and things like that, which I don't think really serves the cause of agriculture. I think if the country's agriculture has to be improved, I think we should have other methods of supporting the farmer and not this waiver, large-scale waiver.
I couldn't agree with you more, Pradeep, but unfortunately, Govind, is populism inevitable in democracies, especially poor democracies? And is it naive to expect fiscal prudence in a scenario where the political class typically does not look beyond the next election? And what can we do to counter this? Can fiscal rules be an answer? And does the experience with the FRBM Act make you a believer or disbeliever in fiscal rules? Govind?
You see, the problem is that, I don't think through farm waivers and populism, competitive populism, populist measures, you can win elections. No, I mean, remember, the present Prime Minister, when he was the Chief Minister, he, when he was fighting election there, he said that I am not going to give you free electricity, I am going to charge you for electricity, but I will give you quality electricity. And he won the election. Now so the issue, at the end of the day, these are all, you can't fool all the people all the time. Now, I mean, this has become, because the Congress, fellows are saying that a farm loan should be given. I mean, do you mean to say that if they had not put forward this farm loan waiver, they wouldn't have won the election? I'm not too sure of that. But the basic point is that I think the political parties have to understand, and they have to come to an agreement that at the end of the day, you can't really have this type of SOPs, and we cannot burden the taxpayer with this. The fact that the corporate borrowers, it's a very peculiar situation we have. If you are a large borrower, then the banks have to change the borrower. If you are a small borrower, then the small borrower is going to be, he has to go and then beg the banks. Now, we have gotten into a situation, a very bad situation. Now, the point is, 2 wrongs do not make 1 right. I mean, the fact that there have been, and then again, there were lots of policy mistakes there. There were a lot of policy mistakes there. The spectrum auction was cancelled, and then coal auction was cancelled. I mean, there were all sorts of policy, problems there. And, they took the contract without the land acquisition in the highways. And so it's all in the infrastructure sector that this has happened. That does not mean that you should compound the problem of the banks through this particular measure. And I'm afraid that this is not the way, and then political parties have to realize and then proceed further. I mean, you talked about Yogi Adityanath being a maths graduate. Dr. Manmohan Singh was possibly one of the leading, most important economists of the country, most leading economists of the country. What did he do in 2008? Yeah, I mean, so why is it that we can't think that there is, you can't really have a free lunch anytime?
That is true, but expecting politicians to understand that is a little difficult. But Pradeep, in fact, not many will remember, but even before the loan waivers, we had a famous loan mailers in the late 1980s during the time of Janardhan Pujari, Minister of State for Finance from your state. You must have been a mid-level officer in the SBI at that point of time. How much did that really impact the banks? Or was the fact that it happened before the reforms and entry of new private sector banks mean that it really made very little difference to banks because they were anyway functioning as extensions of the finance ministry? Pradeep?
See, banks, at least on paper, were assessing every proposal on its merits during those times. These loan melas, the impression that was created was by the political system, yes, every one of you is eligible, you don't have to do anything, you just borrow, you don't have to repay. And even the press in bank, I was a junior level officer heading a branch in Bangalore those days in the 80s, mid 80s, when the famous Pujari loan melas were there. And what everybody said, you show your ration card, you will get money, and even middle class people came and demanded loans from me. So unfortunately, that culture, I think, which was started in the late 70s and early 80s, it has come in some other form now. So ultimately, I think the public sector's banking system is being misused by the political class for their own benefits. Unfortunately, the country has to pay for it, taxpayers have to pay for it.
That is true. In fact, that is really the crux of the problem, that public sector banks are invariably used as social instruments and ultimately the buck stops with the taxpayer. But I'm afraid on that note, it's time for us to slip into a very short break. Please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili and we're discussing the merits and demerits. In fact, there are hardly any merits of the farm loan waiver scheme with Govind Rao and Pradeep Kumar. Govind, this farm loan waiver is really not a first. The UPA government, as you yourself mentioned, had done much the same thing and on a much bigger scale in 2008 with a countrywide farm loan waiver and a debt relief scheme that cost the exchequer close to 70,000 crores. As a result of which the fiscal deficit shot up from about 2.5 to more than 6% in the subsequent 2 years. And though it did win the 2009 election, a lot of people will say it did it because of that. Would you agree that the higher fiscal deficit perhaps contributed to their losing the 2014 elections, as it really limited their ability to tackle the slowdown because the fiscal deficit had ballooned? Govind?
No, I agree with you partially. The reason is that, fiscal deficit, 76,000 crore at that time was somewhere about 1% of GDP. Now, in addition to that, you see, they had two other things. One is, expansion of National Rural Employment Guarantee to all the 600 districts. And the second one was pay commission, the implementation of pay commission recommendation. More importantly, if you remember in July 2008, the price of crude oil went up to $165 a barrel, and then that really sealed the fate. Now, we have been just recovering. Now, this particular wave of loan waiver is going to create an additional problem. On the one hand, you are saying that, you see, the states have to, sort of have the fiscal discipline. And here is your own party which goes about and say that I will give away 36,000 crores like this, and I issue bonds, and these bonds will not be counted for fiscal deficit target. And, if the union government is allowing this type of a thing, then how do you really hold the whole state governments to responsible for things? Ultimately, and now this is on top of your, electricity bonds. Where will the fiscal discipline go at this stage? Where will the fiscal deficit, if every state goes on doing this,
Absolutely.
What will happen to the fiscal situation in the country? How will you then, at the same time you want to reduce the interest rates? How are you going to reduce the interest rates? Center is inducing the states for fiscal discipline, and this is unacceptable to any fiscal economist.
But Pradeep, would you agree that the farm loan waiver again highlights a lack of a level playing field between the private sector and public sector banks? Because when it comes to farm loans, it is primarily the public sector banks, apart from the cooperative banks, that really lend to agriculture. So any adverse impact on credit discipline also impacts them more. And it is high time we realize that we need to have market instruments like, say, crop insurance, rather than having these kind of shortcut measures.
I do agree. See, the 18% agriculture target is there even for private sector banks. But they have their own ingenious methods of achieving it. I'm sorry to say that. Public sector banks are the really ones who give the small time crop loans in the rural areas, and the credit discipline gets affected. Yes, in the short run, these waivers, the government pays the banks NPAs may come down in the short run, but it spoils the credit discipline in the entire country. Even if it is done in one state, I'm sure there will be demand from other states also for similar type of waiver, especially in BJP ruled states. And this will spread and the credit discipline will suffer. I do agree that the production risks have to be countered differently. Yes, there is distress in the rural sector. There should be a comprehensive crop insurance for every acre of land in this country. Only then we can avoid all this drama baji that the politicians involve.
Really. Govind, in fact, the saddest thing is that UP is already one of the poorest states in the country. And so is this the best use of taxpayer money? Isn't it time we started thinking of the centre telling the states that please do not go down this way? Agreed, the centre officially has told the states that we will not come to your rescue. But in a situation like the kind of fiscal federal republic that we have, can you really contain the states' problems within the states? You've been a member of the Finance Commission and you know very well that one of the ways in which the Finance Commission really distributes resources horizontally is to say that certain basic minimum services all citizens in the country must have access to regardless of where they are. So can you really contain an irresponsible state that ensure that only that state suffers? Is that very naive to expect it, Govind?
No, but the point is that, see, this is all done with the tacit approval or the approval of the centre. I mean, obviously when you start doing this, every state will demand, and there will always be a lot of political discretion in matters like this. Economic decisions get completely crowded out and the political decisions come in, and that's a dangerous thing to do. And I mean, there is so much of a moral hazard. People have not thought of the moral hazard and the permanent damage you do to the structure of, system of borrowing and lending. And this is not the way, certainly we cannot go about doing this. As far as the centre's, transfer system is concerned, there is a limit up to which the equalization can be done in a system that we live in. But the point is, once you have the thing, you really have to, one possibility is that you should move away from the general purpose transfers, but, and completely go to the specific purpose transfers. But that is not a solution to the problem. Money is fungible. They can continue to do anything they want. Now, and the problem is many of the centre's actions impact on the states. Now, you have fertilizer subsidy. You have, food subsidy, coming from the procurement policy and things like that. Now you have loan waiver. Instead of all this, if the money has been used for proper investment in agricultural sector, in terms of irrigation, and in terms of, creating a proper marketing facilities and agricultural extension facilities and crop insurance, I think the life would have been much easier for the farmers. And rather than trying to do this type of thing, there will obviously impact of the policies spill over, but then there are ways to find it. Even if though the agriculture is the state subject, Union government has been spending huge amount of money on the state subjects and then complaining, saying that I don't have money for spending on my own subject.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think nobody wants to take hard decisions. That really is the problem. We're looking for fudges all the time, everywhere. But Pradeep, in a scenario where banks are really compelled to lend to agriculture under the priority sector, and there is this constant kind of political interference, loan mailers, loan waivers, do you foresee a situation where the banks, faced with this kind of continuous interference, try to fulfill their priority sector obligations by lending to the Rural Infrastructure Development Fund rather than making loans directly to agriculture, which is what they should be doing? Pradeep?
That is already happening, Mythili. I remember when I was in SBI, when I was handling treasury, I was seeing the amount we are making investment in RIDF. Why were we investing in RIDF? Because we were not achieving the targets for agriculture. Why we were not achieving the targets for agriculture? I think one of the reasons was the mindset of our people that if I lend now, tomorrow that will be waived. Why do I lend? The other thing is the way the incentives, the interest incentives, the subvention that is being given, it is being given only for crop loans, only for produce loans. It is not being given for investment in agriculture. Somebody wants to invest, let us say, in drip irrigation. There is no interest subvention. So I think policies have to change substantially if agriculture, if you have to improve agriculture production, reduce the distress the farmer is in. I think we should look for long-term solutions. I agree fully with Mr. Govindarao. All the suggestions he made, like investing in agriculture, farm extension, marketing, all these things have to be done. But unfortunately, these are long-term efforts. And I fully also agree with them, if the subsidy money which is there for fertilizer and things like that are diverted to investment like this, I think we can reduce farm distress much faster.
Absolutely. But Govind, in fact, the RBI governor has also pointed out that if borrowing keeps increasing like this, because ultimately it impinges the centre's balance sheet also, then there will come a time when the entire economic stability of the country will be threatened and private sector investment will also be crowded out. But given that politicians will always look for short-term gain, regardless of the long-term pain, when will the public realize that such schemes come at the cost of much needed development and expenditure, and they don't allow politicians to keep pulling the wool over their eyes again and again? Can we ever hope that the public will catch them at their game?
Governor Urjit Patel had have sent a very clear message, and I think that's very refreshing. The reason why I'm saying, he has concerns on two accounts. One on the macroeconomic side with this type of a thing going and the taxpayers' money being misused for this purpose. The second thing, as a banking regulator, he has a major problem when you spread the culture of non-payment. So on both accounts, I think he was concerned, and then he expressed it very candidly. I think that's a refreshing thing. Now, as far as we were hoping that when BJP came to power at the center, they were hoping that the culture that they had developed in Gujarat, where you had to pay and then get the things would be brought into the union government level. But that has been belied. One is so sorry, but if they continue to do this type of a thing, it will be too late in the day, but then I think it's not going to bring them any additional political votes. Because the macroeconomy will suffer. When the macroeconomy suffers, the whole country will suffer. It is not just one section or the other. Now, but then of course these are all long-term solutions, long-term impacts. But we will only have to hope for that the politicians will have a better counsel. And and as I said, they will come to some sort of an arrangement where this type of competitive populism is shunned.
Well, I'm afraid until public and the civil society forces politicians to face up to the truth, I doubt the political class will ever see reason. But I'm afraid that's all the time we have, and we'll have to end this discussion now as we've run out of time completely. Thank you very much, Govind and Pradeep, for joining me and pointing out the dangers stemming from the loan waivers for our viewers. Agreed, we're only adding our voices to those of the present and the previous RBI governor, the SBI chairman. So in all probability, even our voices will fall on deaf ears in the government. But hopefully it will help build public opinion on the subject. For not only is there no free lunch, however trite it might sound, but it's also far better to teach a man how to fish than to give him a fish a day, because you cannot possibly give every man in India a fish a day. Thank you all for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. In the meantime, if there's any issue you would like to hear discussed in this program, do mail us at the email ID you see at the bottom of your screen.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/etnow.